Matthew McConaughey, he's a native of Uvalde, Texas, actually visited the White House, gave a very emotional speech, went quite viral actually, in which, he had an interesting, nuanced take. I don't agree with many of the policy positions that he put forward, but I don't think that you can not help but listen to the man. And he framed it in a way, this is what I appreciated the most, Krystal, as I grew up in Uvalde, it's where I learned how to use a gun. I believe in responsible gun ownership. He made it clear, he's like, I don't believe in taking people's guns away. I want to try and find some sort of middle ground solution. And he also talked about family values. He talked about strengthening, mental health resources and more. There really was something for everybody. Why don't we go ahead and take a listen to a little bit of that we have here.
We need safer schools. We need to restrain sensationalized media coverage. We need to restore our family values. We need to restore our American values. And we need responsible gun ownership. Responsible gun ownership. We need background checks. We need to raise the minimum age to purchase an AR-15 rifle to 21. We need a waiting period for those rifles. We need red flag laws and consequences for those who abuse them. These are reasonable, practical, tactical regulations to our nation, states, communities, schools, and homes. Responsible gun owners are fed up with the Second Amendment being abused and hijacked by some deranged individuals.
I think he frames that better than any Democrat thus far.
I haven't seen any. President Biden's out there talking about an AR-15 banning 9mm ammunition.
High caliber.
Yeah, high caliber, not yet, which also knows nothing about guns.
And I think that McConaughey here, from my experience growing up in a family where Second Amendment was very important to my father and growing up in a community that is rural and has high rates of gun ownership, I think he channels what a lot of responsible gun owners feel because, if you are someone who this is part of your culture and this is what you have grown up with and you have been schooled since day one of the proper way to handle a gun and to store a gun and to keep people safe, and then you see some kid being able on their 18th birthday, I don't want to call him a kid, he was a man,
he was an adult.
But on his 18th birthday, being able to go and buy 2 AR-15s, having no training, having no idea what he's doing. Yeah, you look at that and you're like, this is a disgrace. Like, it shouldn't be that anyone can just casually acquire these guns with no limits, no checks, no responsible training whatsoever. And so he framed this as, this is not a setback for the Second Amendment. This is a step forward for the Second Amendment, and to make sure that we don't have just, a culture of sort of abusing the Second Amendment, but actually respecting these powerful weapons. So the other part of the speech, it's very emotional to listen to because you should watch the whole thing. It's worth it because he spends a lot of time talking about the families that he and his wife met when they went to Uvalde, who their kids, their dreams for the future that have been cut short. One of the teachers, I don't know if you guys follow this, I don't think we talked about it on the show. One of the teachers who was shot and killed, her husband died of a heart attack.
I know.
The next day, they leave behind 4 kids. They had been working hard to get their house painted. They wanted a food truck when they retired. They were planning all these things for the future, and all of that is gone. So listening to the humanity of these children and these lives that have been lost is not easy to do, but I really do recommend that you listen to the entirety of his speech. And I said this before, Saagar, I have specific position and ideas about what I think would be beneficial in terms of gun control. I do think lifting the age to 21 makes sense. I think red flag laws make sense. I think safe, gun storage makes sense. And there are some other I don't have any problem with like banning high capacity magazines and things like that. But at this point, I think it's so important for the country that we could just do something so that there's a sense that we can act. I mean, tragedy after tragedy after tragedy, and we have these spikes in attention. The emotions are really raw, and then it sort of dissipates and goes away, and literally nothing happens. I mean, it just really reinforces this sense that you are in a failed, declining state where even things that have 80%, 90% bipartisan support, there's just no chance. There is no responsiveness to the public will, and it's extraordinarily depressing from that perspective as well.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from, but I mean, I think my issue is that if people were like Matthew McConaughey and seemed legitimate and didn't seem like they were going to encroach, much, much further, I think a lot of people like me would be like, okay, maybe we can talk. But I mean, you have the president talking about banning 9mm ammunition and AR-15s, and then the vice president, Beto, is like, I'm going to come and seize your AR-15.
What did you think of what passed in the House last night?
Oh, I mean, look, 18 to 21, I think it's maybe fine. I just am extraordinarily, especially on red flags, I mean, I just do not trust the capacity of the Justice Department and of these states in order to administer this fairly. And I think that, responding in a mass tragedy event like we did post 9/11 to give up an immense amount of civil liberties was a traumatic and terrible mistake that had long-term ramifications. And my fear is that we're looking exactly in that. If it was just 18 to 21, and again, I haven't heard, I talked to a lot of people in the gun community, I haven't heard a great argument against it. That being said, it does open a slippery slope. So on that one thing alone, on the merits, I think, okay, maybe I'd be willing to talk. But
see,
red flag is the one I'm just absolutely not gonna get
I don't think the red flag
Yeah.
is what was included. I'm looking at the details of what was passed last night in the House, which again, I think has no chance of the Senate at this point. But it doesn't actually include the red flag laws. The big piece of it was lifting the age 18 to 21 for assault weapons. And I just don't buy the slippery slope argument here because it's so hard. I mean, not even these things, which are incredibly moderate and supported by like a majority of Republicans, 70 to 80% of Americans, are probably not going to get through. So I don't conceive of a world in which, okay, well, and then that leads to they're going to take all your guns. That's totally counter to what we've actually experienced over the last several decades, which is a slippery slope in the other direction of, states increasingly loosening any sort of gun regulations, including that's the direction Texas certainly has been headed in, but many other states besides. Like that seems to be the direction of the slippery slope versus any kind of increasing sort of licensing or age restrictions or limits whatsoever.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying, but again, the caution is always, not today, but it could come sometime in the future. So, I mean, I see you have in front of you, like,
you just have
in the details of the bill.
Don't you just have to judge the legislation on its merits today,
so
what's on the table
firearm
today?
storage is a good example. It's like, okay, great, I completely agree everybody should have firearm storage, but how are you going to enforce that? Does it mean a police officer is going to come in my house and find me for not having a gun in the right place? It's like, well, now we have Fourth Amendment problems. I mean, is the ATF, when we have, for example, private sales.
Do you really oppose safe firearm storage in the home?
I think safe firearm storage should absolutely be encouraged, but I don't know.
90% approval
Sure,
rating.
but what about enforcement? I mean, do you want a cop to be able to come into your house and check how your gun is stored? No, I absolutely don't want that.
What I want is that if there is a child who gets a hold of a weapon which was improperly stored in a home and ultimately kills themselves or someone else, that there's some legal ability to hold someone responsible for their total negligence in allowing that situation to unfold.
I actually do believe there is a negligence standard whenever somebody uses, a child doesn't, or whenever you improperly store your weapon. I've seen cases where that
it depends on the state. It's state by state because not all states have these rules.
Right, but I'll give you another one. Private gun sales being passed towards another. That actually requires a universal registry of firearms. And so when you have a universal registry, that actually was the precursor in Australia for going and making sure that you could buy back everybody's guns. 3D printing is another one. Look, I mean, I know I might sound radical here, but part of the problem with all of these things is that when you put heavy amounts of enforcement, you give the ATF and other people more knowledge, you have more data.
So would you do anything?
Well, I mean, on the current one, I honestly just don't think that there is any.
So you think we just have to accept this is how it is? There's going to be school shootings. We're going to have mass violence. There's not, the suicide rate. I mean, that's
terrible.
Honestly, the mass shooter events are the hardest ones to disrupt. What I think you could have more of an impact on is domestic violence and suicide, where just having easy, immediate access to a firearm, no waiting period, no safe storage, the sort of accidents that all too often kill our children. Those are the sorts of things that I think you could more easily have somewhat of an impact on, but you just don't think it's worth it.
When it's not about worth it, it's about what's the cost. I mean, look, like I said, I keep going back to 9/11. I mean, 9/11 was a horrific tragedy, terrible event. 3,000 people were killed. Was it worth 20 years later giving up an immense amount of civil liberties? I have no idea what this country's going to look like in 20 years from now. I'm honestly not optimistic about it.
The Patriot Act and safe gun storage and universal background checks are not remotely
having lived in Washington, D.C. over the last couple of years and seeing the literal breakdown of society, and then also seeing that a lot of people are okay with it, has made me so pessimistic and frankly more of a gun radical than I've ever been in my entire life. I literally do not trust the state to save me in any unsafe situation. That's literally where I'm at.
So
right
you
now.
are now full-on libertarian on
not
everything.
libertarian.
I mean, but that's what it sounds like. Because here, the problem is
on like individual safety. I want people to be able to empower themselves, because if you look around, if you live where we live, like I don't see how you can trust these people whatsoever.
So what would you? So you would respond to this with nothing?
I mean, in the current situation, I would say we have a terrible situation where it comes to both mental health and a lack of trust, and that would be my number one focus. But like, I don't think there is a one-shot. I wish it was a legislative issue, but I just don't see it. Like I've said it before.
Obviously, look, there are a lot of deeper issues here. Mental, 100%, Medicare for all. Everyone should have access to mental health treatment. No doubt about it, okay? By the way, the Republicans who are like, let's talk about mental health, they're very opposed to that.
Yeah, and they deny the
that's certainly the case
and that's ridiculous.
in Texas. But just on the numbers, you cannot deny that when you look at it, we are massive outliers in terms of the number of guns, and we are massive outliers in terms of the amount of gun violence. I mean, the two things are linked. Like there is just, the idea of, we just need more guns, more good guys with guns. That's silly. That's a fantasy. I think the case that you can make is the one that you're trying to make here, which is like, I would rather accept the violence and have the freedom than to try to do anything, even on the margins, to curb the amount of violence.
Yeah,
is that your position?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that when you live in an extraordinarily free society, that it has an extraordinary amount of cost, and that also living in Europe or anywhere else where you don't actually have a lot of rights sounds far more terrible to me than, yes, accepting that we live in a country with 400 million already guns that exist, and that will mean probably a higher amount of violence and of crazy events. Look, Europe is quite safe. This is what I would call a safetyist mindset. It's the same thing that led to lockdowns, COVID.
But
it's
again,
like safetyism is an immense amount of cost.
Sure,
but
personal what's
autonomy.
being contemplated here isn't taking away every gun. It's, hey, maybe you shouldn't, as a stupid 18-year-old with no training, be able to go out on your birthday and buy an AR-15. Maybe we should wait until 21, because we know a disproportionate number of the murders that happen with these weapons happen between 18 and 21. Hey, maybe we should have some regulations in place to make sure people store guns properly in the home so we don't have these horrific accidents. I mean, maybe we should make it so that, if you have like this dude who's carrying around bags of dead cats and telling everybody he's gonna rape and kill them online, that maybe there's some process in place where you say, hey, a weapon for you doesn't sound like a great idea. This is not some overreaching, insane, like we're gonna round up all your guns, you can't do anything, and it's an infringement on your way of life. In fact, I think as Matthew McConaughey put it very well, like a vast majority of responsible gun owners who take these weapons seriously support making responsible ownership part of the culture and part of the regulatory culture.
No, I hear what you're saying, but I mean, look, Richard Reed tried to blow up a plane in 2002 with a bomb on his foot, and now all of us have to take our shoes off unless you literally pay the government
but this is
for
not
TSA
that.
Pre.
This is gun
We
violence
don't know that.
every single day.
Nope, everybody in
That's one
02
instance versus like we know we have a violent society. So it's not like a red herring this is just theater.
This is all being framed in terms of mass shootings. And look, I appreciate at least you're talking about suicide because that's what it is. But listen, I mean, are we really supposed to, even the 18 to 21 thing, as I understand it, that might be the case in terms of the mass shootings and the school shootings, but that is not necessarily the case whenever it comes to suicide deaths.
I don't know about suicide, but in terms of homicide.
Again.
It's disproportionately 18 to 21-year-olds. So, okay, waiting, and we're not even talking about all weapons, we're talking about assault weapons, waiting until you're 21 years old.
But how do we know that in the 18 to 21 case, even in homicide, that this is something that these aren't being illegally procured guns? I mean, isn't that the case, and especially within gang violence and in urban? I mean, look,
sure,
here
that's
in DC,
why you crack down on straw purchases. Again, none of this is going to be a magic fix But I don't believe that means you should just say we can't do anything, because I do think it's instructive. This dude waited till his 18th birthday till he could buy it legally.
Yeah, sure. I mean, but Columbine happened when the assault weapons ban happened through straw purchase because they got some weird friend of theirs in order to go and to buy the gun. I forget what his name was.
Yeah, it's never. Of course, it's not going to solve every single instance. There's no question about it. We're talking about, can we reduce the numbers on the margins, not just of mass shootings, but of all gun violence. And I think there are some steps we could take. And, the American people overwhelmingly agrees. And I find it very depressing that Congress is completely unresponsive to what the overwhelming public will on this is.
I mean, I don't even disagree necessarily with the statement. I'm trying to present to you, listen, the last couple of years have changed a lot of things for me. I didn't think we would ever live in this country that we are, and it has made it so that I'm extraordinarily skeptical, especially whenever it's DC, Virginia, or these types of extraordinarily blue states where if I were to live in them, I would want to give people as much power as possible in order to try and protect themselves should the time ever come. As depressing as that sounds.
Okay. All right. We'll leave it there because we've had this debate a lot. But
all right, let's talk about Kavanaugh.
I just fundamentally disagree that the answer is just to give up on government being able to do anything good.
I don't put it that way. I would say, okay, let's try, it's a meme, but let's talk about root causes. Let's restore trust in society. There's a lot of different things.
Yeah, but there's also harm prevention in the meantime.
But harm prevention, reduction. Think again, harm reduction, these are all great intentions, awesome intentions. But we know, as we saw in the COVID regime, that whenever you give a little bit of power, that it can encroach tremendously on your day-to-day life, and that the safetiest mindset, there are little kids in New York. I just saw 2 days ago, walking down the street here, little preschoolers with masks strapped to their face because of school policy. New York City, Eric Adams is still for it. My point is that as you saw in those cases, the safetiest mindset exactly, which led to universal mask mandates, which honestly I even supported at the time 2 years ago. I was like, oh, this stuff gets pretty out of control quickly. Washington, D.C. was one of the last places in the country to lift an outdoor mask mandate. I mean, look, these things have real costs. And when you give people that power, especially in the current environment.
But even the fear-mongering around that was, this is never going away. Well, it has. I mean...
Well, it hasn't gone away. It's more that we kind of accepted it, which we probably should have accepted
almost everywhere in the country, there are no mask mandates. Schools were open until, summer vacation and all of that. So I also thought that there was a lot of overreach there. But the maximalist argument that, now that they have the power, it's never going to go away and we're going to be stuck wearing masks forever in all places, et cetera, that didn't come true.
We'll see. Everybody's saying monkeypox is airborne now.
New lockdowns around every corner. Are we in lockdown? No, we're not.
Yet.
So listen, again, I think there are big problems with government overreach, especially in terms of FBI, law enforcement overreach, especially in terms of surveillance, Patriot, all of that is certainly true. But I don't think the answer to that is to say government can't do anything to make our lives better and our communities safer. Because then you just that's just giving up. I mean, it's just a very nihilistic view to say everybody's on their own and you can't. The problem isn't let's make a more accountable government that's more responsive, as in this case, responsive to the public will. It's let's just not have a government at all.
I'm just not sure how possible that is in the current environment.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.